Hello students, now we are going to start the most awaited program, that is DIAS, Decoding and Interlinking Anthropology Syllabus. Now a brief introduction to this particular program that will be launched or that is being launched with this video is that under this particular program we are going to have 4 different sections, and in each of those sections we are going to realize the interlinking of various topics of anthropology, for the reason that we know and we have been realizing across the various discussions that we have gone for in the previous sessions with respect to the anthropology being a dynamic subject. Now, as part of this DIAS, we would be discussing the interlinking of concepts regarding physical, which is the first video. Then second, we would discuss with respect to the socio-cultural aspect of paper 1 and paper 2. Third, we would discuss with respect to the archaeology. And in the fourth session, we would discuss with respect to the tribal anthropology, and we would see all across these sessions how are we going to decode the syllabus and how are we going to interlink these concepts at various instances. Because when you look at the norm of the anthropology as a subject in the market that you have come across, that most of them consider anthropology to be a static subject, which is a very big myth with respect to the consideration that anthropology being a static subject. For the reason, when you look at the anthropology as a subject, it has a lot of contemporary relevance, not only contemporary relevance, but it also has a lot of interlinkages that are persisting. And when you try to understand those interlinkages that are persisting with respect to anthropology as a syllabus, you would see that all across the papers there is a crisscross that is existing, and if you are able to map that kind of crisscross that is existing, automatically you would be able to bring in dynamism, and you would also be able to bring in an organic nature with respect to anthropology answers, right? Because when you look at the answers that are daily posted, that is what that can be observed with yourselves every day. Now with such a kind of understanding, now let's get started. Now in this particular program we are going to do, one is with respect to the decode. We are going to decode the syllabus. Not only the decoding the syllabus, but we are also going to look at various interlinkages that are present. Not only with respect to the interlinkages, but we would also see that particular section, what are the hotspot areas. We call them as hotspot areas for the reason that there is a frequent questioning that is seen from that area. Now in this today's session, we are going to do for physical anthropology such a kind of analysis. And please understand, my dear, whenever you are writing the answer, please understand that you should be able to interlink in this manner. Now moving on to the aspects of physical anthropology, we know that chapter 1.4 comes under physical anthropology. And when you look at this 1.4, in this, the biological and cultural factors in human evolution, there you get to understand the linkage that is existing between the biology and the culture. Right? For example, with a cooked food, you would see the dentition of the individual changing. So such a kind of variation that is seen, and the corresponding theories are seen. And in this, what you would see, the latest theory that is present is with respect to the synthetic theory, and the corresponding variations are seen in this context. And you would see that this particular chapter would create a factual base for whatever we are going to see as part of the 9th chapter. That is what is the understanding, and this is what is going to create the pretext, this is what is going to create the historical understanding of various theories that are present in the context of the physical anthropology. Because what happens is, here they are saying theories of organic evolution. And when you look at the theories of organic evolution, human evolution is considered as an organic evolution, human evolution is considered as a mosaic evolution. And with such a kind of understanding of mosaic evolution and organic evolution, you would see that would have a linkage with 1.5 and 1.6. and the categorical linkages of 1.5 and 1.6 we would deal to a larger extent, especially when we are handling the archaeology part, right? Now with such a kind of understanding on 1.4, now we would move on to see that 1.7 is also a thing that is to be learned with respect to physical anthropology, the biological basis of life. And when you look at this biological basis of life, what you get to understand is that here we get to see that it is talking about the DNA structure, it is talking about the replication, it is talking about the protein synthesis, it is also talking about the gene mutation. That means here you are able to get the raw material that you generally study in the context of genetics, because all your genes, all your chromosomes, all your DNA arrangements, the DNA replication, the stages of DNA replication and an extension you would see with respect to the protein synthesis, right? All these are acting as a raw material with respect to understanding the subject of the genetics. And with such a kind of understanding on the raw material, here what you would see that this kind of DNA structure and replication and mutation as a topic, you would see that this is going to be repeated further in the 9.1 chapter. Now moving on to the main sections of physical anthropology, that is starting from the 9th chapter, you get to understand that you would start off with the human genetics. Now when you look at this syllabus of human genetics, here you get to see that you majorly talk about man family studies. And when you talk about this man family studies, it is fundamentally talking about the various understandings, either that man family study can be a qualitative study or that can be a quantitative study, right? It may be with respect to the qualitative or it might be with respect to quantitative study. Or this man family study can happen with respect to DNA level. This man family study can happen with respect to gene product level. This man family study can happen at the chromosomal level. So when you talk about these aspects that we generally understand, you see that all of your man family studies that we are going to see, be it pedigree, be it your cytogenic, be it your biochemical, be it your immunological, what is happening is it is either at DNA level, it is either at gene product level, or it is either at the chromosomal level. And when you get to understand this man family studies, you would see that the pedigree analysis is with respect to understanding of the various inheritance that is present. And here when you have to interlink this pedigree analysis, that you can straight away link this pedigree analysis with respect to the lethal, sublethal and polygenic inheritance, because that is where you get to understand with respect to the dominance and the recessive. And that kind of dominance and recessive, you would see there is a variation with respect to your autosomal as well as the allosomal chromosomes, right? Autosomal recessive, autosomal dominance, allosomal recessive, allosomal dominance. You would see the different kinds of analysis that is present and different kinds of permutation and combination that are present. And we also study something called as Holandric inheritance. And when you talk about Holandric inheritance, it is fundamentally talking about the sex chromosome that is present, right? You would have 5 different kinds of understanding that we generally see in pedigree analysis. With such a kind of analysis, moving on forward, you would see that it might be with respect to the biochemical methods, it might be the immunological methods. Now here biochemical methods or immunological methods, as part of biochemical methods, we would talk about the action of various enzymes. And once you are able to understand these various enzymes, once you are able to understand the Galton's theory of nature and nurture, you would be able to interlink with respect to the biochemical methods. Then apart from that, you also talk about immunological methods, and when you talk about immunological methods, you know that has fundamentally got to do with the interaction of antibody and antigen interaction. That antibody and antigen interaction, and depending on that kind of interaction, you know that some genetic level changes are going to determine the nature of the interaction that is present between the antibodies and antigens. That is where we study here. That is where we study maybe with respect to your agglutination methods, right? Maybe it is with respect to your ELISA kits, right? Or maybe it is with respect to the hybridization methods. So all these methods we get to see with respect to when we are studying the immunological methods. And from there, we go on to talk about the DNA technology and recombinant technology. And when you talk about this DNA technology and recombinant technology, you would have an interlinkage with respect to this DNA and recombinant technology in chapter 12. Right, in chapter 12, see this, the DNA technology in diseases and medicines. That is what you are able to understand, that is what you are supposed to understand, right? So how are you able to understand this DNA technology and recombinant technologies vis-a-vis it might be in the applications of diseases, or it might be in the applications of medicines, right? That is the interlinkage that is present. Now apart from that, you also see that there is again coming forward with respect to the Mendelian genetics in man family studies. Again we have seen this man family studies up. Here also we are talking about man family studies. And here what we are understanding is we fundamentally talk about the basics of Mendelian genetics. Here we talk about the basics of Mendelian genetics, that is the 4 laws of Mendel's. Then from there we went on to talk about the single factor and multi-factor inheritance. Because one fundamental understanding with respect to this is that we know that polygenic inheritance is an exception to the Mendel's laws. Polygenic inheritance is an exception, it is a challenge to the Mendel's laws, and the concept of the dominance and recessiveness is also a kind of the challenge to the Mendelian genetics. Apart from that, we also know certain aspects with respect to epigenetics. That is also an issue with respect to the Mendelian genetics. Right? So with such kind of understanding, we also know this polygenic inheritance is again related to genetic polymorphism. Polygenic inheritance is nothing but your genetic polymorphism. This genetic polymorphism, you know that there are different types of genetic polymorphism, and you know that this can occur at the cell level, this can occur at the cell surface level, this can occur at the gene level. So different kinds of genetic polymorphism that is existing. And we have also seen that the aspect of selection, right? When you talk about this aspect of selection, that is again with respect to here, this aspect of selection has got to do with the Darwinian principles. The Darwinian principles that we had discussed in chapter 1.4. Right? Moving on further, you get to see the Mendelian population. Right? You know that this Mendelian population can be of different types. That is, either it might be with respect to gametodine. Right? So different kinds of Mendelian populations are existing. Then from there you go on to discuss the last section of 9.3, that is mutation, isolation, migration, selection, inbreeding and genetic drift. Here we have to observe that we come across selection again. Selection was also here. Now here when you look at this context of understanding, what you get to understand here is all of these are the forces of evolution. Right? All of these are the forces of evolution. All of these are Falconer's forces of evolution. That is what we study. And when you try to study these Falconer's forces of evolution, you know that these are systemic forces and these are dispersive forces, which is resulting in the origin of variation, which is resulting in the spread of variation, which is resulting in the fixation of variation. And you would study this term of mutation again, we have seen in the context of 1.7 chapter. 1.7 chapter we have discussed about mutation, right? Now again with such a kind of understanding, what you get to see is that this genetic polymorphism that you are studying as part of 9.3 has an interlinkage with respect to chapter 9.6. Because when you look at this chapter 9.6, what is this chapter 9.6? Fundamentally talking about age, sex and population variation as genetic markers. Now genetic markers and this variation is nothing but the genetic polymorphism. You know that the variation in the genetic markers is fundamentally a manifestation of genetic polymorphism that we generally come across. That might be with respect to your ABO blood group, that might be with respect to your RH factor, or that might be with respect to HLA. Because in ABO we have 3 different types of antigens, or it might be with respect to HLA we have 5 different types. And based on that we have different kinds of the combinations and permutations that are present, your transferins, your GM, right, the blood enzymes, or apart from that the physiological characteristics. When you try to understand this physiological characteristics, what you get to see is that this physiological characteristics will have a variation with respect to the biological or the biocultural adaptations that you study in 9.7. the biocultural or biological studies that you study in 9.7. We will get to such interlinkage once we finish this 9.3 and 9.4. And moving further in the 9.3, you would see, moving further in 9.3, what you get to see is the second thing they are talking about is consanguineous and non-consanguineous mating. And when you talk about this consanguineous and non-consanguineous mating, you need to understand that this is nothing but a manifestation of inbreeding. Because what is happening is when you are talking about consanguineous mating, it is equivalent to inbreeding. Right? It is equivalent to inbreeding. And when you are drawing the inheritance chart, you would be able to understand what is the nature of the inheritance that is happening in the context of inbreeding. Or if you are able to put an Punnett square, from that also you would be able to understand the different variations that are existing. Once you are able to decipher that with respect to your consanguineous and inbreeding, once you are able to decipher that consanguineous and inbreeding are interrelated, you would see that there is suppression that is seen, or there is a kind of homozygous condition that is prevailing. And once you are able to have this homozygous condition that is prevailing, you would certainly understand that the recessive diseases would start to appear into the population, which is creating what, my dear, which is again creating a kind of genetic load that we study here, a kind of genetic load that we study in the immediate aspect, because we know that there are different kinds of genetic loads that are present, that might be with respect to your mutational load, or that might be with respect to segregational load, right? That kind of consanguineous kind of breeding, the consanguineous kind of mating which is resulting in inbreeding or equivalent to inbreeding, will result in a segregational kind of load. That is what is the interlinkage that is existing, because we know that the H.J. Muller's concept of mutational load is also existing here, right? Then it is asking about the genetic effects of consanguineous and cousin marriages. That is what is understanding. And here you get to see that you can relate this particular aspect of consanguineous and cousin marriages with respect to when you are seeing the marriage chapter. When you look at the marriage chapter, you know that there are different forms of marriages, and there are different marriage regulations that are existing. And when you are understanding these marriage regulations, it is either preferential, prescriptive or proscriptive kind of marriage systems that are existing. And in this context you would come across the cousin marriages, in this context you would come across the consanguineous marriages, in this context you would come across the inbreeding. Are you seeing, my dear? There is so much of repetition that is there in this syllabus, and not only that, there is so much of interlinkage that is existing, right? Moving on to the next aspect, that is the 9.4. And in this 9.4 we have seen that the raw material for 9.4 we have already seen in 1.7, that is with respect to the chromosomes. It might be your allosomes or autosomes, the different kinds of chromosomes that are present, the characteristic features of the chromosomes that are present, right? With such kind of understanding, what we get to see is with respect to the chromosomes and chromosomal aberrations. Now when you talk about these aberrations, it is fundamentally talking about the deviations that are observed in the context of the chromosomes. The deviations that are observed in the context of chromosomes. And when you talk about such a deviations with respect to the chromosomes, what you get to understand is, you see, the numerical and structural aberrations. Numerical and structural aberrations, that is disorder. That aberration can be because of the number, because we know we would have around 46 chromosomes, and in that is 23 pairs of chromosomes. In that, one pair is the sex chromosomes, right? That is, if one aspect is missing, right, that is, it might be with respect to the Down syndrome, that is, it might be with respect to Patau's syndrome, that is, it might be with respect to Edwards syndrome, or that is with respect to the Cray-Duchart syndrome. All these are what, that is again with respect to the number, they are related to the number. Or with respect to the structural aberration, the phenomena like translocation, right, the phenomena like the ring inversions, all these are different forms of the structural aberrations, and you also have the numerical aberrations. Now in this context, what we get to understand is that such a phenomena is highly prevalent, majorly when we are discussing about the consanguineous and inbreeding concepts. The consanguineous and inbreeding concepts, and that is where we are having this interlinkage with respect to the aberrations that are present, right? Then once we understand this, when you look at the second part of the 9.4, which is most neglected by most of you, but UPSC often asks the questions in this. And when you look at this particular section 1, it is talking about genetic imprinting. And when we talk about the genetic imprinting, again it is such kind of the aberration that is present, that you would see that it is with respect to the Prader-Willi syndrome, Engelmann syndrome, or some of the examples that we discuss with respect to the genetic imprinting, or that might be because of the hypermethylation phenomena that is occurring. And with such a kind of understanding there, now what it is saying is that the next aspect of this chapter or this section is giving you the solutions regarding the understanding of these chromosomal aberrations. That might be the genetic screening, or that might be the genetic counseling, or that might be the gene mapping, or that might be the genomic study, or that might be the human DNA profiling. So what is happening is the simplest way forward, or the simplest solutions for most of the problems that you have in the 9.4 part A is nothing but these suggestions. Because you would come across such a suggestions again when we are discussing the 12th chapter. And when you look at the 12th chapter, where you would see, my dear, you would come across the genetic counseling and euthenics. There are three different forms of such things that are existing, and you get to understand that this genetic counseling and eugenics is fundamentally some of the promotive genetic studies, some of the promotive genetic practices that are generally observed. Right? That is the interlinkage that is existing between this section and chapter 12, that is the part of your physical anthropology, that is dealing with respect to applications. And when we discuss this paternity diagnosis will certainly have again an interlinkage with the chapter 9.6, because on the basis of ABO blood group, on the basis of the arrangement, we would be able to understand the different permutations and combinations that are existing. Right? The first hand study can be done by drawing the Punnett square of such a ABO kind of understanding, ABO kind of arrangement, and on the basis of the probability, we would be able to go for paternity diagnosis. And you would also see that the forensic anthropology, which is again a part of 12th chapter, will become an evidence for the paternity diagnosis. In this case, we would talk about ND Tiwari case. In this, as a case study, we would talk about ND Tiwari case. Right? Are you understanding? Right? Moving forward, when you look at the 9.5 section, it is talking about race and racism, the biological basis of morphological variations of non-metric and characters, right? Non-metric and characters, it is talking about the racial criteria, racial traits, heredity and environment, biological basis of racial classification, racial differentiation, and race crossing. Now all this is what you would see, that the race and racism as a phenomena would evolve as a kind of adaptation, as a kind of variation, as a kind of mutation. All such forces of evolution are going to act upon the different forces and the different races that are being formed. And most of the debates that exist, whether race is a biological concept or a social concept. For a thinker like Franz Boas fundamentally talks about race being purely a biological concept. It has nothing to do with the social concept that is existing. Whereas UNESCO also talks about such a similar kind of stand in this understanding of race and racism. Right? And you get to understand such a variation is existing with respect to the phenomena of genetic polymorphism, with the phenomena of different kinds of inheritances, and with the phenomena of variation that is existing, and you can link this 9.5 with the 9.6 right away. And moving on to the 9.6, that we have seen that 9.6 has a relation with the 9.2 and 9.3 chapter of polygenic inheritance and genetic polymorphism phenomena. Then moving further, when you look at the 9.7 chapter, it is talking about the ecological anthropology. And when you look at the ecological anthropology, in this it is categorically talking about the biocultural adaptations. And when you talk about the biocultural adaptations, it is talking about that the necessary adaptations that are made, the necessary acclimatizations that are made with different kinds of environmental stress that are existing in the region. And when you try to understand that these different kinds of environmental stress that are existing in the region, you get to see they have given three different stress. And when you look at the three different stress here, it is with respect to the hot desert, it is with respect to the cold, it is with respect to the high altitude. Hot desert, cold and high altitude. And in such condition of hot desert, in such condition of cold, in such condition of high altitude, what is happening is you get to see is that there is a variation, there is a kind of adaptation that is existing. And here what you get to see is that you will be able to interlink this 9.7 chapter to to an extent to the 6th chapter, that is dealing with respect to the anthropological theories, and especially there the neo-evolutionists perception about the cultural evolution, about the various adaptations would be able to be deciphered by understanding this 9.7. And when you look at this, such a kind of interlinkages that is seen, as I said, that there is a linkage with respect to adaptation and the physiological characteristics. Because for example, when you look at high altitude climate, what happens is the hemoglobin level is very high, it is around 22, 23, but whereas the normal plain individuals would have around 14 to 18 range. They would also have a variation with respect to respiratory, they would also have a variation with respect to sensory, they would also have a variation with respect to the pulse rate that is existing. That is what is the kind of interlinkage that can be given from 9.6 and 9.7. Right? Moving on again with respect to the epidemiological anthropology. And when you talk about the epidemiological anthropology, we need to understand the concepts of health and disease. And when you look at the health and disease, what is happening is, one is the infectious disease, the other one is non-infectious disease. And when you talk about the non-infectious disease, it fundamentally talks about the genetic diseases as well. It fundamentally talks about the genetic diseases as well, where we can talk about the chromosomal abnormalities that are existing. Right? With such a kind of understanding, you get to see with respect to this 9.8, here what you see is the understanding of the infectious and non-infectious diseases. Here please understand, my dear, you have to emphasize more upon the theory of disease. You have to emphasize more upon the theory of disease, and you should also be able to decipher a concept called epidemiological transitions. The concept of epidemiological transition, and you should be able to talk about the 3 different phases of epidemiological transition that is existing. And once you understand this, then you talk about the nutritional deficiency. And when you have to interlink this particular concept of the nutritional deficiency, what you get to understand with respect to this nutritional deficiency is that this same concept can be interlinked with respect to the factors affecting growth. Factors affecting growth of the 10th chapter, where you have the nutritional aspect. Then not only that, we can also talk about with respect to the methodology of growth studies. That aspect also we can discuss. Not only that aspect that we discuss, we can also talk about with respect to the fertility patterns and differentials. How is nutrition playing a role in the context of menarche? How is nutrition playing a role in the context of menarche? For the reason that when you try to understand the concept of the secular trends, when you try to understand the concept of secular trends, you know that the secular trends are 3 different types. Either it is positive, either it is neutral, or either it is negative kind of secular trends. And when you look at the understanding of these secular trends, and when you look at various studies, that might be the T. Ramireddy study, when you talk about the Ramireddy studies of the menarche and the age of menarche, it comments that the age of menarche has been declining in the context of urban centers. And the major reason what is given is with respect to the nutritional factor. So such a kind of interlinkage can be given even with respect to the 11.1 chapter. Then again moving on, you would also see in the 12th chapter also there is nutritional anthropology. Here there also again you get to understand the variation that is existing. So nutritional deficiency related to disease, the factors affecting growth, then again the methodology of growth study, then again the menarche, again the fertility patterns, then again the nutritional anthropology. See 11.1, 12, 10 and 9.8. That is what is the understanding that we are supposed to remember. Okay, then moving on to the next, that is the concept of human growth and development. You see that this concept of human growth and development, when you look at the factors affecting the growth, and when you look at the factors affecting the growth, especially the genetic factors, you get to see the phenomena like inbreeding. All these are going to affect the phenomena with respect to the growth. Then apart from that, you would also be able to understand with respect to the aging and senescence. Not only with respect to the aging and senescence, you would also be able to understand the different methodologies that are present for growth studies. And when you get to see these different methodologies with respect to growth studies, that might be the longitudinal type, that might be the cross-sectional type, that might be the mixed type. There are different types that are present, and such is a relation that is existing. Then again what you get to see is here the human physic and somatotyping. And when you talk about this concept of the human physics and somatotyping. When you look at this concept of human physics and somatotyping, you can straight away interlink this human physics and somatotyping with respect to the concepts of kin anthropometry, that is anthropology of sports. Because you know that the Bill Ross concept of kin anthropometry would have a variation in understanding what is the physics, what is the body type, and you get to see that there is a linkage between the kin anthropometry, human physics, and somatotyping. That might be the Viola type, that might be with respect to Krishmer's type, that might be with respect to the 4 different types that we discussed in the context of somatotyping. Right, that understanding and that kind of extrapolation needs to be given in this context. Then moving on to the 11.1 chapter, what you get to see is the relevance of menarche, menopause and other bio events to fertility. And this menarche and menopause, you get to see that both of them are dependent upon various other factors that are present, and with respect to the fertility differentials, you also see that there is a relation that is existing between the 11.1 chapter and 11.3 chapter. Because in 11.3 it is talking about biological and socio-ecological factors influencing fecundity and fertility. Because when you understand this fecundity and fertility, what happens is, when you look at the various life cycle events or the bio events that are present in the context of women, we have menarche, right? The birth, after that we have this puberty stage where we have menarche, after that we have at a cause called menopause. Now here what happens is, whatever is the reproductive capacity that the individual is persisting in this time period, whole of it we call it as fecundity. And not only that, when we get to understand that whatever is the actually realized potential in this period, we call it as fertility. And we see that there are various fertility patterns that are existing, and you get to understand that there is this variation of fertility that is fundamentally seen in various parts with respect to the northern India, with respect to the northeastern India, with respect to the southern India, because you get to see that a factor called total fertility rate. Right? Such is the understanding with respect to your 11.1 and 11.3. And anyways, when you look at your 11.2 chapter with respect to demographic theories, you would see that this 11.2 chapter is directly related to the second chapter, the demographic profile of India, where you are talking about various factors influencing its structure and growth. That is what is your demographic theories: the biological factor, the social factor and the cultural factor. Right? Then moving on to the 12th chapter, which is the culmination of all of these concepts that we have discussed so far, and the final applicative aspect. When you look at it, we have seen that anthropology of sports, the kin anthropometry is regarding the somatotyping, the nutritional anthropology is regarding with respect to chapter 10, chapter 9.8, and again the chapter 11 that we discussed. Then anthropology in designing of defense and other equipment, this is nothing but dealing with the anthropometry. And here again the phenomena of anthropometry is again dependent upon the physics and the somatotyping. Then forensic anthropology, and here what we talk about, the forensic anthropology will certainly have a relation again with 9.6, because the forensic anthropology, which is a culmination of the criminal aspects as well as the medical aspects, and when you look at this, it certainly has an interlinkage with respect to the genetic markers. On the basis of the HLA, on the basis of the ABO, you would be able to decipher, and the principles of personal identification and reconstruction. And next part is the applied human genetics that we study as part of 9.1, 9.2, 9.3. The paternity diagnosis, we said it is again related to 9.6. Okay, then again we have seen that the genetic counseling and eugenics we have seen as part of already 9.4 chapter. Then DNA technology in disease and medicine we have already seen in 1.7. Also we have also seen in the context of 9.1. Now last aspect is serogenetics and cytogenetics. Now when you talk about the serogenetics and cytogenetics in reproductive biology, this has a relation that is existing with respect to various bio events that are present, relevance of menarche, menopause and other bio events to fertility. And other bio events to fertility, that is, this has a relation that is existing with respect to serogenetics and cytogenetics. That means the serogenetics and cytogenetics has got to do with the relation of 11.1. Okay, so when you look at the concluding remarks that can be made with respect to the physical anthropology and the corresponding syllabus, you get to see that all of them are interlinked. All of the concepts that you study are interlinked, because what happens is this karyotype analysis here, the cytogenetic method. Here again see cytogenetic method which we see in the 12th chapter, the chromosomal and the karyotype analysis, very similar, right? The immunological methods, the DNA technology. So what is happening is, you would see that there are bunch of topics which are interlinked across these chapters. There are bunch of the topics which are interlinked across the various chapters that we have seen, and you see that most of them are repeated. If you want me to categorically show you by highlighting that what are the different kinds of words that we have been seeing as a repetition, this biological and cultural factors is a repetition, right? This biological and cultural factors is a repetition, right? This organic evolution and mosaic evolution is a kind of repetition that we see all across the sections. We see that mutation is a kind of repetition that we come across, the kind of chromosomes, the repetition that we generally come across, right? Then again moving on to the core syllabus, you see this, please understand, please focus upon this wherever I am highlighting it. You see that this cytogenetic method that we already come across in the 12th chapter, right? Then not only that, you would also talk about the chromosomal analysis, the DNA technology that we come across the 12th chapter, and the recombinant technologies we come across in the 12th chapter. And your polygenic inheritance has a relation with the multifactor, has a relation with the genetic polymorphism. All those are repeated. Again we come across this word of selection here and here, right? Not only that, we also come across the word mutation in 1.7, which I already showed you. Okay, then your inbreeding and the consanguineous marriages has a relation. And apart from that, not only this consanguineous mating, it is nothing but relation with the cousin marriages. Okay, all these are resulting in the genetic load. And not only that, you get to understand that the concepts of the genetic counseling is related. It is again repeated that across the syllabus, right? Across the syllabus, we would also see this genetic counseling in 12th chapter. Not only that, we also get to study that with respect to, when you talk about this 9.6, it is all about genetic polymorphism. It is all about genetic polymorphism. Then again the 9.7, which is with respect to the ecological anthropology, there you see with respect to the genetic and non-genetic factors, where we again come across in the growth chapter. Okay, then the physiological responses. See here, physiological responses, physiological characteristics. Now please focus on the words which I am highlighting. All these are repeated words across the syllabus itself. Now remember how easy it is for you to recognize these things. Okay, then nutritional deficiency has a relation with respect to the nutritional factor of growth, has a relation with respect to, then again has a relation with respect to the menarche, has a relation with respect to the nutritional anthropology that is mentioned in 12th chapter. Right? So look at the word nutritional, it has been repeated all together. Right? Not only that, you also get to understand with respect to this that the human physics and somatotyping has a linkage that is existing with respect to the anthropology of sports, kin anthropometry. And we see that your genetic counseling is repeated, your cytogenetics is repeated, and the DNA technology is repeated. Right? Look at this, my dear. See how many words that I have highlighted which are repeated in the syllabus itself. Just the words are repeated. That means, don't you think your business of studying, your business of making notes is, which is very much minimized. Okay, so such is the pattern of this program of DIAS that which we are going to do for the next 4 videos, and after that we would come across a video on the HOTS, that is with respect to the hotspot areas regarding the anthropology syllabus of paper 1 and paper 2. Then on we would come across with a video on how to make notes on the anthropology topics, especially regarding the chapter wise note making section. Right? So hope this was useful, and stay tuned for all of these videos. Okay, thank you.